Okay, well, first of all, congratulations. You guys kicked the pants out of my test yesterday. Oh my goodness. I'm so proud of you guys. It was awesome. The average for the class was 90.2 something. So, well done. That is awesome. I love that. Okay, and also congratulations on your white coats last night. It was fun to see that. Okay, so we're going to move into the lower limb, new section. And today we're going to go over a few topics that are really important to get. Okay, so these are these overview topics. These are things that are going to be incredibly relevant that show up on all kinds of fun little exam questions even after this class. So really key in on these and then use those key concepts to help you understand what's going on later in this section as well. Okay, so we're going to start off with just some defining terms and figuring out the limits of the lower limb. So first of all, we're going to start out with the upper boundaries, and we've been talking about the inguinal ligament here. That is the anterior border, one of the anterior borders of the lower limb. Very important definition between the pelvic cavity and the lower limb. And then we actually have the border, upper border of the lower limb to come up in, around, and back the iliac crest. So anything external or lateral to, posterior to, and inferior to the iliac crest is all part of the lower limb. So anything outside of or inferior to the iliac crest is considered the lower limb. Then that continues down around the sacroiliac joint and the edges of the sacrum and coccyx. But the ones that I really want you to know are the inguinal ligament, and the boundaries of the iliac crest. Those two are the most important ones. The inguinal ligament, remember, is a location where we have lots of communication between the pelvic cavity and the lower limb as well. So then, if we say take that boundary, then from there down we need to categorize different regions of the lower limb because we have to categorize everything. It's good for us. So we've got several regions that we want to talk about. And so we'll start at the top and work our way down. So the gluteal region here first. So that's going to be the part that starts at this upper portion of the iliac crest and everything down to just below the the top part of the femoral shaft. Below that, we have the thigh here, and they show it as the anterior and posterior thigh. And then below that, we have the leg. So I want to make sure that the leg is clearly defined for you guys. So we think of this whole limb as the leg, but that anatomically is incorrect. The leg is technically the portion between the knee joint and the ankle joint. Okay, so when we talk about leg in this class, that's the region we're talking about. When we talk about the upper portion of the limb, we're going to talk about the thigh. So that's important to make sure you remember. And then finally, obviously the foot is the most distal portion of the limb. Okay. Okay, there's a few locations in the lower limb where the neurovasculature runs very near the surface of the structure. Most of the time they run fairly deep or covered with some serious layers of fat and muscle. But in a few areas, the major neurovasculature comes out towards the surface of the limb. So first of all is the femoral triangle here. And this is where the majority of the major vessels coming from the pelvic cavity into the lower limb cross through there, and they are superficial. They are very near the surface of the body.
Can you say that again, please?
So the femoral triangle is where the major vessels and nerve run from the pelvic cavity into the anterior portion of the lower leg. They're very near the surface, so you need to be aware of these areas. And why would that be important to be aware of these areas? Yeah, so surface injuries to these areas can actually cause serious neural damage or serious bleeding because these structures are so near the surface. Okay. The next one down is the popliteal fossa. This is a patch right on the back of the knee, again, where nerves and vasculature are very near the surface. And we'll get into the details of these later on. And then finally, we have the tarsal tunnel, which is an area just behind or posterior to your medial malleolus. So that bump on the inside of your ankle, right here, that is your medial malleolus. And so the tarsal tunnel runs right behind it. And that's the third location, where we have lots of major vasculature near the surface of the limb. There we go. Just put that note in there. Okay. So then we want to talk about center of gravity and where that's located in relation to the joints and in portions of the lower limb. And remember when we talked about the back, our secondary curvatures bring that center of gravity forward to minimize the energy expenditure when standing. So I can stand without having to use a lot of muscle. Same is true when we look at it in relation to the legs. So in the pelvic cavity, the center of gravity is right in a central location. So we're kind of balancing in a central location, which helps balance the weight evenly on both feet. So we're not tilted off to one side or the other. Okay. It is also runs, as we drop down the leg, it drops down anterior to the knee joint. And what that does is allows us to stand with a lock to knee joint and really not use much muscle activity to keep that part of our center of gravity stable. So, again, minimizing energy expenditure. And then finally, it is anterior to the ankle joint as well, which brings the distribution of weight forward onto the whole foot instead of back on just the heel part. So it helps maintain stability anterior posteriorly. So if I try to stand with my center of gravity directly over my ankle joint, I'm likely to fall backwards, not just because of the klutz. But if I have it standing with it dropping down just in front of my ankle joint, then I'm transferring the weight partially under the ball of my foot and giving me a broader base to stand on. That make sense? Okay. Come on, go forward. Okay, so we've seen this before. The beginning of the semester, we learned different movement terms. So just refresh them in your mind as it refers to the lower limb. A couple of things I do want to point out, just some quick additions to what we learned basically. With abduction, we can have abduction in terms of the femur moving in relation to a fixed pelvis, so moving your leg out sideways. Or you can have abduction of the pelvis on a fixed femur. So when I planted a foot and I tipped my pelvis towards that planted side, okay? This is really important in locomotion. So part of what our hip joint is doing is abducting a little bit. And that's allowing the shift of our center of gravity to be minimized as we're transferring weight back and forth between our feet during walking. Okay?
So is the opposite side considered adduction then, or not?
Sorry?
So if you're abducting the left pelvis, is your right pelvis adducting?
That would depend on the relationship between that thigh and the pelvis. So it's always in relation to the thigh. So I can be abducting this side and abducting this side at the same time. Okay, so it's not necessarily opposite in all situations. Okay, so again, just refamiliarize yourselves with these terms because we'll use them a lot. So then moving on with this idea of locomotion, we just want to talk about how we walk for a few moments. So there's two phases of a stride. There's the stance phase, where you have your foot planted on the ground, and you have the swing phase where you're moving it forward to take a step. And you alternate stance and swing on each foot as you're walking. Now, when we think about how our leg and our pelvis move when we're walking, it's actually a lot more complicated than what you kind of just think when you're out just walking. You know, when you're walking, you think you're just moving your leg forward and the next one forward. But in actuality, there's a lot more going on that allows us to minimize energy expenditure and also to maintain our center of gravity in as consistent a location as possible. Okay, so big thing with locomotion, minimize movement of the center of gravity. And that movement can be rising, so raising the center of gravity takes work because you're pushing against gravity. And also lateral movement of your center of gravity tends to destabilize. So there's 4 things I want to talk about in relation to that. So first of all, we have pelvic rotation as we stride. So this minimizes the drop of the center of gravity as we stride forward. So we're able to take a long stride by rotating our pelvis. And instead of, say, if I just rotate my pelvis or keep my pelvis straight and take a stride, I'm going to drop that center of gravity and have to recover that height again. Whereas if I rotate my pelvis as I walk, I can keep that center of gravity level and still take a nice long stride. Does that make sense? Okay. The knee flexion in full stance here. So while I'm walking, I'm not keeping my knee of my standing leg, my supporting leg, straight the whole time. It actually goes through a slight bend in the middle of the stride. It kind of just very slightly bends. That keeps me from raising the center of gravity too much as I'm transferring my weight forward on that limb. So if I walk straight-legged, you can see I'm increasing, I'm gonna fall over in front of the class, that'll be good. So increase my center of gravity, and then it's going to decrease, you know, whereas if I bend my leg slightly in the middle of that, I'm maintaining that level center of gravity. Okay. Pelvic tilt. So again, this is talking about that abduction or adduction of the hip joint. So tilting the pelvis as I'm swinging a leg forward, so tilting it this way, again, is going to minimize the rise in the center of gravity. So keeping it as close to the same location as possible. And then finally, as I move my legs, my knees tend to move in towards the midline and then come back out towards where I would plant my foot. So it's not just a straight movement, it's a slight movement toward midline and then back out. Okay? This helps reduce the lateral displacement of the center of gravity. So if I walk with my knees and everything in one line, I'm actually going to shift my weight back and forth and become less stable, right? Whereas if I swing my leg in and actually compress how much I'm spread laterally with each stride, it's going to maintain that position, that's the center of gravity. Does that all make sense? Any questions?
Can you just wait for a second?
Yep.
Do you mind demonstrating the last one again?
So it's probably easier if I come down this way, huh? All right, here's my catwalk. So if I've got my leg and my knee in a single plane, take a step here, take a step here. See how my hips are moving back and forth so much more? That's shifting my center of gravity, and I'm much more liable to fall one way or the other, much less stable. I feel much less stable, okay? If I allow that knee movement to come in, I'm reducing the movement of my hips, see? And keeping my center of gravity in a straight line instead of wobbling it back and forth. Does that make more sense? Okay. We ready to forge ahead? Okay. Things I do in front of the classroom. It's almost as bad as when I was modeling. Okay, so major bones of the lower limb, they should be easy. Just to review. We have the femur that's attached to the pelvic bone. The two smaller bones of the leg, the tibia and the fibula. We'll get into the details of all of those. We'll have trochanters and all kinds of good stuff to learn. Then I just want to point out the major groups of bones in the foot. So we have the tarsal bones. These are cuboidal or irregularly shaped bones. So these are where we get some pretty funky looking bones in the foot that connect the foot to the leg. The first set of long bones in the foot is the metatarsals. And then the second set of long bones actually make up the toes. These are the phalanges. Should be a nice review for you. And then the toes, remember we start numbering them with the big toe. So the big toe is always 1, and we go out from there. Same is true with the hand. Thumb is always the first digit. So just a reminder of those.
Do we need to know all the little bones within the tarsal bones?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
For today, no. Okay. All right, so then since we're talking about the foot, let's talk about the arches of the foot. So we've got 3 arches we need to be aware of. We have the transverse arch here. So the metatarsals are actually grouped together in an arch-shaped form, not just flat like a duck's foot. We have 2 longitudinal arches that run the length of the foot. This shallower one is the lateral arch, which is on the lateral side of the foot. And then the higher arch is the medial arch on, of course, the medial side of the foot. And what then is the purpose of these arches? Why don't we have flat feet like a duck? Cushioning, it's shock absorption. Stability, yeah. Also rebound, elastic rebound. So as you're stepping or running, that arch compresses slightly, and as it snaps back into shape as you're taking off of that foot, that actually propels you forward just a tiny bit. So it contributes to the energetics of taking a stride forward. So it's acting like a little spring, kind of pushing you up off of the ground you're walking on.
So is it maximizing or minimizing energetics?
It is minimizing how much energy you have to expend. Yeah. So energetics, it's a more complicated term. Yeah, it's just the energy balance, not necessarily energy used, but energy balance. so you can't really say maximize or minimize in this.
Well, the notes just said minimizing the energetic
Oh,
locomotion, so I was
that-
wondering which way you
oh,
were
right.
going with that, so.
That's I've partially finished editing that sentence, so it's gonna minimize energy expenditure.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what happens when it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm writing lecture notes. Thank you for bringing that up. Make sure that's clear. Okay, so then, major muscle groups. This again should be nice, easy review. We've got 3 major muscle groups of the hip joint. We have the extensor muscles. They're located typically in the gluteal region. We have abductor muscles. And then we have the rotator muscles. And we'll get into those in detail later on. Just a reminder of those 3 groups. Then we also have, on the more anterior side of the story, we have the hip flexors, which then bring the lower limb forward. Excuse me. So we'll get into what muscles are composing each of those groups. We have them listed there, but we'll get into the details of all of that later on next week. Okay, so then when we're talking about the muscles of the leg, we can talk about compartments of the lower limb. So there's groups of muscles that are bounded by thick bands of fascia, separated from each other. And these are what we call our compartments. Typically, they contain muscles that all contribute to a similar motion of the leg. At least most of the muscles do. There are some exceptions, obviously, because we can't categorize everything perfectly in the human body. And they can be innervated predominantly by a single motor nerve. Not single motor neuron, single motor nerve, so collection of motor neurons. So what I want you to know is what the compartments are and what their major function is. So we'll start with the thigh here. The anterior compartment of the thigh, what would that predominantly do? Muscles on the anterior part? Extend the knee joint. As these muscles work, muscles are always going to pull, so extend the knee joint, right? Posterior compartment. Yep. So flex the knee. There's an extra knee there. Let's try this again. Okay. The posterior compartment also is involved in extending the hip joint. So we have muscles that are attached up in the pelvis as well on the posterior compartment. So that's going to extend the hip joint. Okay. And then finally the medial compartment. And the medial compartment is going to be involved in hip joint movement. So again, because it's a more complicated compartment, there's hip rotation, hip abduction, all kinds of things happening. So we'll just say hip joint movement for this point in time.
Does the anterior also flex leg?
Typically, those are more of the medial compartment. I'm sure there's some exceptions to the rule, but predominantly the anterior is going to be composed of the rectus femoris and the vastus muscles that are all controlling extension of the knee. Okay. One thing I want to point out too is that there is no lateral compartment in the thigh. No lateral compartment. Okay. However, in the leg, there is a lateral compartment, but no medial compartment. So we have lateral compartment. but no medial compartment in the leg. So that lateral compartment is going to be involved in everting the foot, so taking and moving the foot outward. Obviously, I need to work on my ankle straight. So that lateral compartment, everting the foot. And then we have our anterior and posterior compartments of the leg. Anterior compartment, again, is going to be involved in foot movement. So it's going to be pulling the foot up, and that would be dorsiflexion, and then extension of the digits. So anything pulling up.
Who's that one more time?
So anterior compartment in the leg is going to cause the foot to dorsiflex and the digits to extend. So it's going to come pull your toes up towards your kneecap. Okay. Posterior compartment is going to do the opposite, right? So it's going to plantar flex the foot and flex the digits. Bless you. Okay. There are also a couple of muscles in the posterior compartment that actually extend up past the knee joint and are involved in knee flexion as well. Yes.
You said there's a couple muscles on your notes. You have only one muscle?
Oh, is it just one muscle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have to know?
You will know, you have to know the muscle, but we're not going to cover it today.
So it's just one, right?
Yeah, just one major muscle that's involved in that. And that would be the gastrocnemius. Okay. So, this is a similar slide to what we've seen before in the pelvic region. Apertures of communication between the pelvic cavity and the lower limb. So this is where we're really going to get into this, and at this point you will need to know what goes out of each and what goes into each aperture, okay? So the ones we want to pay attention to, obviously the greater sciatic foramen, the lesser sciatic foramen. Those are really important there. The obturator canal, so that obturator vessels and nerves that exit that, really important for upper leg, or sorry, upper portion of lower limb. Phew, there we go. And then finally, we have this gap between the inguinal ligament and the pelvic bone that we have a lot of structures moving into and out of. So those 4 apertures, you need to know what travels through them, as well as where they are.
Can you wait a second?
Yep.
And what did you say we need to know about this?
Where they are and what travels through them. And we'll go into that in detail as we go along. Okay. We good? Okay. So we're going to start off identifying a few of the major nerves of the lower limb. So there are 3 major nerves and then the branches of one of the nerves that I want you to know. So we talked about the obturator nerve. That you need to know. It originates from L2 to L4 spinal nerves. The femoral nerve, obviously, that's one of the major anterior methods of innervating the anterior part of the lower limb. And then finally, the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve, I want you to know 2 branches of that. I want you to know the tibial nerve So this sciatic nerve splits just above the knee, and it splits into the tibial nerve and the common fibular nerve. So those two branches of the sciatic nerve.
You said it splits above the knee?
Just above the knee. Okay, so then this translates into a lot of the dermatomes. So those nerves are mixed nerves. They contain both sensory and motor information. And so we have our dermatomes of our lower leg, which again are all sorts of messed up, not nice and linear like the thorax and the abdomen. So at this point, I do want you to memorize these dermatomes, okay? And I want you to memorize them because we also have certain points, autonomous zones of those that are the locations where you can test whether there's loss of sensation in that dermatome or not. So knowing where the dermatome is and where those autonomous, I can't even say that today, because autonomous zones are going to be important for assessing whether or not there's loss of function in one of these nerves, one of these spinal roots, okay? So each of the dermatomes is listed out as we're accustomed to, and then each one of these dots represents an autonomous zone. So when you're doing like a cutaneous sensation test, you're going to stimulate that part of the skin and want to know, okay, can you feel this? If you're close to the border of two dermatomes, even though these are lined out really nice and sharp and crisp and stuff like that, there's overlap. Okay, so the majority of the input to this region is from L2, but there's going to be a fuzzy gray region in here where there's going to be overlap between the two regions that are innervated by L2 and S3. Okay, so if you try to do a cutaneous sensation test here, you're not going to know whether they really can feel in L2 or whether you're actually picking up some sensation from S3. So by testing at these zones, these are areas where there is high degree of confidence that you're just testing that single dermatome. Okay? Make sense? So, as well as dermatomes, we also have myotomes. And remember, myotomes are the regions of muscle, or the muscles that are innervated by one spinal nerve. Okay? Unlike the dermatomes, it's a lot more difficult to map them out on the surface of the body because the muscles are taking their own happy path wherever they want to go. So it's not as easy. So instead of mapping it out spatially, we map it out functionally. Okay? So spinal nerves L1, L2 are going to be important in hip flexion. Those are going to be innervating muscles involved in hip flexion. L3 and L4 are important in knee extension.
Isn't L1 and L2 hip extension?
Hip extension and hip.
That's what, in L1 and L2.
Did I say that in the
That's what
notes?
we have in the notes.
Let's make it backwards. Jeez.
So it says extension in the notes.
Does say extension, doesn't it? But this is flexion. This is the flexion. I think I was just half asleep when I was writing
Okay,
that.
so we'll change it to flexion.
Yes, change that to flexion. I should never try to write notes at 6 that late at night. Oh my goodness. Okay. L5 to S2,
What was L3 L4?
knee extension. L5 to S2 would be knee flexion. And then S1 and S2 would be plantar flexion of the foot. And then finally, adduction of the toes, so squeezing your toes together, S2 and S3. So these are some major myotomes that you should be familiar with, know the spinal roots contributing to those. Okay. Yeah.
So like for hip flexion, what kind of motion is that? Is that like bringing your hip?
Hip flexion is
forward?
bringing your leg this way. That's flexing the hip.
Extension is Just bringing it back.
Yeah,
Out?
extension is back this way.
Is that, would be that lateral also?
No, no, lateral would be abduction.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Is it okay that the general idea, like flexion is whatever brings it closer to a natural point? Cause like if you bring your leg forward, it's more of a natural motion versus extension, you're extending back away. Kind of like extension, your natural motion is to bring in,
You could kind of say that roughly, yeah.
but not a general rule to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say a very general rule of that.
Okay.
There are some rules, I just can't remember them at the moment, and I forgot to look them up last night.
Does it have to do with decreasing the angle and increasing?
It has to do
Yeah.
with angle of the joint. So when you increase the angle of the joint, that would be extension, that's right. And then decrease the angle of joint would be flexion. Thank you, I couldn't remember that. All right, good. So this is gonna be our best bet at mapping innervation by nerves in a general sense. So this is kind of, again, both sensory and motor combined in these nerves. So you've got each nerve, so say the femoral nerve, really important for anterior compartment of the thigh, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to be a really helpful diagram. If you learn it really well, it's going to help you organize the rest of the chapter. Okay, so this is a big one, big star. So take the time to know where each of these major nerves, the femoral nerve, the obturator nerve, the sciatic nerve, and its branches here. Know the compartment of the leg, so the major region of the leg they innervate. So this is going to relate both to dermatomes, to myotomes, though it doesn't match up exclusively with what we are talking with the last two slides, it's part of the picture, and this is going to really help you organize muscle innervation and all of that as we go through the rest of the chapter.
So the common fibular nerve is a branch of the sciatic, and then
Mhm.
the superficial and deep are branches of the common fibular nerve?
Yes, that is correct. So, common fibular nerve branches into superficial branch and a deep branch. And this is a branch here. They don't show the tibial nerve on this one. Okay, so this is going to be a very helpful figure for you to know well. Okay, so then we've got all these major nerves running deep through the thigh and the leg, but then they send branches cutaneously because we have to have cutaneous innervation as well. And you do not need to know the major patterns here. Just like we talked about bronchopulmonary segments, it's the concept I want you to get, okay? So different nerves, say like the obturator nerve versus the femoral nerve, each of these is going to send branches, cutaneous branches, superficial branches, out to the surface of the limb. What I do want you to know is that these superficial branches, superficial nerves, run through the subcutaneous fat. Okay, and then send small branches up to the surface to innervate the skin. Excuse me. I also want you to just note, just for your information, to help you remember, note the similarity between this figure and this figure in the regions innervated by each nerve. There is a strong correlation, obviously, because the part of the lower limb that is innervated by each nerve is going to include that cutaneous region as well. Okay. All right. So then, just want to talk about these nerves that are running around all over the place for a moment, and something we need to be aware of when we're dealing with fractures. So there are areas, so example here, the common fibular nerve wraps tightly around the neck of the fibula. So you can see it coming in around here, very closely associated with that bone. So if there is a fracture in that region, what do we need to worry about? Nerve damage. So first step, reduce and stabilize the fracture, then test for nerve damage. So we need to know, okay, did that common fibular nerve get severed or crushed or something when that injury happened? So. Okay, so that's the question. Is there nerve damage after the fracture? Okay, and then finally, I just want to touch on a couple of the major superficial veins of the lower limb. So one we've becoming quite familiar with is the great saphenous vein. This is one that begins right about the level of the medial malleolus, and then runs up the medial portion of the leg and the thigh, and then eventually drains into the femoral artery.
Femoral artery.
Vein. Thank you.
I was like, hold on, is there something weird going on there?
We've got some crazy circulation happening here. Vein. I can't believe I said artery, that's hilarious. Okay. Then we also have the small saphenous vein, which begins at the lateral malleolus and runs around to the back of the leg and runs up the back of the leg, right in that subcutaneous fat layer, until it reaches the popliteal fossa at the back of the knee. Then it dives deep at the popliteal fossa. Some people pronounce it how did the other person pronounce it? I've always said popliteal. Popliteal? Yeah, other people have seen popliteal, yeah. And then it joins in with the popliteal or popliteal vein. Okay, and this. Just forgot to mention also the great saphenous vein dives deep at the femoral triangle. Okay, any questions? Does that all make sense? Okay, if there's no questions, that's all I've got. And we'd about hit it on the nose today. 12:49. Look at that. Good luck with your Higgs-Pix test. Yeah, question?
That's already done.
Oh, you already did it?
Good luck.
Sorry?
Are we coming to the
No, there's no class on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
Hallelujah. Oh
Now
yeah,
we're
just
having a quiz.
you have to stay behind. No, I'm not even gonna be here. One note. There was some question.